Right. Welcome back. Welcome to the week. That Eduardo and I touched base early last week, and I said, should we get together today? And he said, everyone's in holiday mode. There's nothing to talk about. And I said, say less, my friend. Say less. Let's skip this week. We'll be back next week. Which there were some things to talk about, but nothing that we missed over the last week that was super important. So welcome back. We've got our friend Nick here again, Karl and Eduardo and I, of course, ready to talk about what the heck is going on in South America. And I think the biggest thing in the last couple of weeks that has happened, development wise, or fundamentally speaking, outside of, well, I don't know, trade, changes in weather, all of these other things, but we obviously had a shift in Argentina's currency. We had talked about it. It happened the afternoon after our last conversation, right? 2 weeks ago. So Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Maybe kind of give some folks the lay of the land. I feel like whenever I talk about how Argentina's currency works with the blue dollar and then the official, I always feel like I'm not doing it justice. So maybe could you explain a little bit about how that works and then a little bit about the shift in currency and whether that's going to impact farmer selling and all of that good stuff. Let's start there since that's been on the forefront of my mind at least for the last couple of weeks.
Sure. Timing was great. Last week we were actually up at the farms in Argentina. So this is a big deal, but specifically more for the smaller to medium sized ag industry, the farmers, the small business. This is the first, item I would say that's a big deal to ag. And the reason is, in the past, even when they did the temporary removal of the taxes, they've already announced with this that those taxes are coming back at the end of June. So everyone it was a good sign, but it was much more of a sign and it was just another farmer selling gimmick. So CEPO was the financial controls. It was the different currency rates. It was your inability to get money out of the country. So if you were a Brazilian who owned land, so if you were a foreigner who owned land and you wanted to do anything, you couldn't buy for over 1,000 hectares. And if you were just sitting on something that maybe a company or something owned, you could just collect a below market rent. And that was kind of the best unless you made a big yield. And private small investment in Argentina essentially died. So, and that's been the story since 2016. And it's no surprise that if you look at corn yields, where comparable land is yielding 30, 40, 50% more per hectare, that yields have flattened to actually trended lower since 16. And that's kind of when, and it was really the big nationalization of 14 and Repsol that really, showed what the plan was of the Kirchners to enforce such protectionism. And then Macri drew a lot of excitement, but they never actually changed anything. So you ended up in this kind of what's been nearly a decade status quo of just absolute underinvestment everywhere. And so this is the first positive sign that foreigners can own things, investment can flow into these undervalued assets, that land that hasn't been developed can. This opens the door to all of the added value industries. You should not want to ship bulk raw commodities if you can finish an animal, develop a biofuel, do things. One of our big thematics right now, especially with the trade war in Trump 2.0, is just how exciting South America is. And I think, we talk a bit about how these big Brazilian operations, but even the small ones are the big winners. And now this opens the door to that spilling over to Argentina. So, so the farmers will get the rate. They can now trust that they can convert it. They'll be much more willing to put it in a bank and hold it. There'll be, the black market for the most part is dead. There's still issues with customs and other things that, won't go away quickly. The taxes, now they probably can't change much until the midterms. So they can't, and again, they have to suppress inflation. March was up a bit, so you're not going to get the devaluation, which puts them in a precarious spot. So they did get a lot of money from the IMF, from the World Bank. They've got, essentially a swap line that'll be opening with the US. They've agreed to extend one with China, but I think probably in the background, they probably also agreed to wind it down. It's, we don't know. But they have enough money now to sort of bridge the gap. This won't solve the problem though of the overvalued peso. So eventually they're going to have to address that, but that'll come after elections because it'll support inflation. So it'll be a crawl until then. But the farmers are going to sell here. I mean, we've already seen it. I think they've sold almost 3 million tons of beans since the announcement. They've got 4.5, 5 million tons of corn exports in April. And again, harvest has been behind. So I think the numbers are actually pretty good. But for how long does that continue?
What, Eduardo, for your side or for the looking at this all, sitting where you are, what do the changes, do they impact agriculture in Brazil? Do they impact the overall outlook? Like, what are your thoughts, or what has been the reaction? Is it minimal? Is it just kind of something that has changed? Or do you guys, in Brazil, are you watching to the south, and does it give you any sort of worry or anything like that? Just thoughts in general, I guess, is what I'm shooting for here with a million words.
Angie, for industry in Brazil, it's important. For example, Argentina crush Jan, Feb, and March a very big amount of soybean.
Mm-hmm.
It's a more than 7 million tons compared to the last year for Jan, Feb, and March. So a lot of soybean meal into the market. Yeah, and if you take from October to March, Argentina add 10 million tons of crushing, the US 1 million, and Brazil plus 1 million. So lot of soybean meal into the market. And then in Brazil, the impact is, if you take the internal market spot and comparing to FOB levels, because it's very low because of the Argentina. And then we see a very big spread, $30 per short ton. So crushers in Brazil, they are changing the strategy, taking more soybean meal into the market, the domestic market, and then selling less to the export market because of the margins, for sure. Then, but the surprise is we have no problem in terms of the internal market is absorbing this increase of supply, which means the feed market in Brazil is growing, which is a surprise because it's very stable. We're growing very 3% up to 5% per year the last 10 years. So it's a big surprise. Then for corn is the same story, because if you have more soybean selling or growing in terms of demand in the internal market, and then corn is the same story. So the impact for Brazil is this spread is growing, and tradings they are taking more soybean meal to the internal market.
Interesting. What are we looking at? Just kind of bouncing back to Argentina here real quick, Nick. Farmer selling wise, you mentioned, like we have seen in Eduardo, it is kind of messing up the market a little bit to see the farmer selling pick up. How much do you think part of the increase in farmers, obviously we've seen the reduction in currency, relaxation or the devaluation, it put more pesos in a farmer's pocket on what they're selling and some of these other things. Is harvest helping drive that a bit more too, do you think? Or do we have a lot more? Like, obviously, you've seen in Argentina a lot of retention, a lot of holding supplies out of the marketplace. Is it a push because of the change? And do we have a lot of supplies to come into the pipeline? Do you think this will change? Do you think the way the Argentina farmer markets changes in a big way, or do you see the big push because you have both? Or all three, really, a trifecta, if you will, of it's harvest, We've had a currency devaluation, and oh crap, I lost the third one. What's the other good thing? There's another good thing that's happening. My brain just went blank, but
So opening the trade.
yeah, the export tax, duh. Like
Yeah,
what's the one I
well,
lost? But because of the three, do you see a big push over the next, 6 weeks plus, and then maybe a slowdown, or what are your thoughts on that?
well, the other thing they've done, so which most people don't realize, and this is what's making it so hard on business, is they eliminated what was called the país, which was the import tax. So a lot of these actual farmers
Yeah,
were able
yeah.
to lock in. So one of the reasons you're seeing more farmers selling is a lot of this money that had been locked in was effectively cheaper. So relative to the expected margins, they're now making more money. So that is helping the spot short-term selling.
Okay.
So this combination is going to encourage some selling. Milei's reelection in the midterms and a much larger devaluation will, getting back more in line with where that peso probably should be, will probably be the big selling, but that I don't think comes till later. It's important, like, this isn't going to bring any of the ABCDs, the big companies, to make more investments in Argentina. They have idle capacity. There's plenty of assets sitting around underutilized. But the confidence at that low level, I mean, it's going to encourage farmer sellings for cash needs to start doing transactions. It really, where you should see it the most is the Brazilian foreign investment. I mean, that's what you should see kind of first come in on the small players. And I think the other thing that for us that we watch close and we'd like to see is like that cross-border trade both ways. So right now it's actually easier for the Argentine to kind of bring something in. It's still, they want to reload bags. I mean, Eduardo, that Rio Grande do Sul corn and demand, in the next 5 years for, northern Argentina or some of these places is just huge potential. I think year on year feedlot placements in Argentina are up 5, 6, 7%. They're starting to try to finish cattle. Again, more export markets opening. So it's going to encourage more demand. But the government, again, the taxes coming back higher June 30th and the currency staying too strong, being walked down, is just going to be something that farmer is still, if you're funding a local business today, the rates are 65%. So if you're borrowing money at 65 and you got to pay, so that's 30-40% overvalued, like, that later this year something's going to give. They got to cut rates, they got to devalue. So the farmers know this. So they're going to sell up front here. They have an incentive to, they're getting more money. They're getting better margins than they were 3 weeks ago. But this isn't going to be that game changer from a farmer selling, simply because it's still a managed currency that's mispriced.
Well, we're talking about supplies out of Argentina because I'm going to lean on Eduardo next, and he's going to enjoy talking about the safrinha corn crop. But Argentina's harvest is underway, and we're a third on corn, a little delayed on soybeans, give or take, but progress looks like it's going to pick up. Any thoughts or any insight on crop size? Like, we obviously had some concerns to start. You've talked a bit about some of the heat, and the worries that may have been driven by the heat and high temperatures that we saw throughout the growing season. Any thoughts on crop size as we kind of near the end of Argentina's year? I think the USDA has us at what, 49 and 50. Still have to look. I don't think they've been quick to adjust, but any insight there on what to expect for supplies in the year ahead?
Yeah, I mean, we've been low for 2 months, creeping higher just on strong finishing rains, 46.5, 47 on both. I think the big one was last year's corn crop wasn't as bad. The Chicharita just didn't hit it as hard, so you had more corn. It just depended when you planted. The big one was they ended up going with more corn than anybody thought, significantly more than we did in November, simply because of how good the rains were and how they carried into. And then December 16th, 18th, it just didn't rain for 6 weeks. So I think that in general, you're going to be 1 million tons either side, all like what we know today. And it's going to pick up nicely here. And I think they'll probably be 25 to 30%, as of today on beans. So I mean, it's going to move.
Yeah. Go ahead,
And
sorry.
no, and prices are they're significantly better than a year ago. So,
Mhm.
you still got that going for you, probably $50 a ton on beans and, 30, 40 on corn. So, I mean, it's much better.
It's nice. Eduardo, bean harvest is pretty much wrapped up across Brazil, right? Are you done for finito finished?
Finito.
What that was awkward on my part, but I said it anyway. So what are you gonna do? But what are you hearing production wise, or what are your thoughts on the bean side? Everyone had we'd creeped up into the upper 170s for a while. It kind of felt like consensus was gonna end up around 175, but then we had a bit of a drier finish, it felt like in the south and some of these other spots. And so it kind of creeped down again into the low 170s if right around there. I think the USDA is around 169. Thoughts on that? Or you think, based on movement and supply availability and basis backing off as of late as farmer selling has picked up, you think we're right in there with crop size, or any thoughts on that and supply availability on the bean side?
Well, for beans, it's a consensus close to 170. So our number here is 169.3, so it's very close to the USDA. The surprise is the Rio Grande do Sul, which is not surprise, but it was much lower than anyone could think about in the start of the crop. The number was 24 million tons, big crop. But then now it's more close to 15 million tons. So it's a number of tradings. So tradings always they want a big crop in lower basis for sure. And then but now they are very pessimistic in terms of the size. The difference is in terms of export program, then we are going to concentrate the demand over the north of Brazil and the corridor through Santos. Then the South last year, for example, Rio Grande do Sul helped to keep the pipeline full up to the end of November. Then they start usually from May onward. This year, this amount will be much lower than last year, maybe 5 million tons. Last year, it was 9 million tons, considering only Rio Grande do Sul export. So the concentration up north will be big, and then depends on the industry. Industry there, they are beating up every week. We have this kind of spread pressures paying more for producers, and then we have the UDR from October, and then we have to think about who are the farmers that are in condition to get all the paperwork and then give to the tradings and to the compliance of the UDR. So I think only Mato Grosso and part of Goiás. So we don't have a lot of farmers in conditions to prove or give the to obey the compliance. So in the end, I think the end of the year will be very, very good for farmers that have or hold beans for the end of the year. That's the difference. So the crop is big, but the south is not going to help as the last year, and the concentration of demand on Mato Grosso, Goiás will be big.
What are you seeing for safrinha corn? It appears, and Nick, you can chime in a bit on the weather. It looks like the expectations are growing. The other day you had mentioned in your commentary, I wrote it down. We could be seeing upwards of 5 million metric tons, couple 100 million bushels of additional, exportable surplus, or at least I see it as exportable surplus. It's going to be more corn available to go into the export pipeline than seen a year ago. What are your thoughts on safrinha crop size and how, domestic demand versus exports. Obviously, domestic demand continues to grow. If anything, I would, and I'm chiming in before I ask you a question and I say something, but to me, to see a good safrinha crop in Brazil is actually supportive in the long run to ethanol. I feel like I'd rather see a large crop help support an increase in domestic demand than a tight one to kill it. But what are your thoughts on safrinha and domestic demand there and how that will result or what will be looking like for exports at the end of the summer and as we move forward?
The lowest number is Conab, as usual, but they are not so pessimistic in terms of if you compare to the first numbers. So it's close to 95 million tons. So it's the bottom. But there are tradings estimating 110. Depends on the area. Because, for example, a big discussion here in Brazil is about Mato Grosso. IMEA, which is a they have a good reputation in terms of following the area, the production, the yields, whatever. So they have a corn area lower than 3 years ago.
Okay.
It is 40. It's at 17 million hectares of corn, and 3 years ago it was 17.6 million tons.
Okay.
The argument is this 600,000 hectares went to cotton and other crops, for example, season.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think so. In Brazil is gergelim. I think it's that. So it's a crop, it's a alternative crop, and farmers they are because it's very profitable and pasture because of cattle market in Brazil. It was dead. Now it's good again in terms of profitability. So 600,000 hectares in Mato Grosso. This is a big discussion, which is a very big number in terms of end production for Mato Grosso. IMEA is 47 million tons and tradings are 52, 53 million tons. So big difference. I think this is in the end the basis in Brazil and mainly Mato Grosso will tell us the truth. Last year, tradings were very, very wrong in terms of size of the crop. Let's see. But the numbers, the bottom is the lowest is Conab with 99 million tons, but tradings 105, 110 million tons. And it's a huge difference. So Brazil, in the end, well, if you take the Conab and then it's 7 million tons more than last year. So of course, we didn't have this growth in terms of domestic consumption. In the end of the year, I think Brazil will compete with the US.
Mm-hmm. So and so that
Or
and
OMD.
go ahead. OND, yeah, that's a
OMD.
to me that's what I keep seeing on it is I'm like, okay, well that means that if we get real expensive last half August, first half October, which is probably pretty likely, or it should be based on carryout at this point. If the USDA is correct and we're 1.4 ish, we should see a sharp inversion. We should see very, very lofty basis levels. It should it should push the US corn out of the global pipeline. But is there anything that you're seeing, Nick, weather-wise? I mean, basically we're out of the woods for the most part outside of an early frost. Yes. Is that, I mean, is the bulk of the safrinha crop pollinated at this point? And
I mean, one of the things that, we look at and do some work around, and I think, like it's important with the safrinhas, and the same thing with Argentina is, we cut early because when you start delaying planting, that marginal hectare comes off fast, like, and your yield potential really does. Similar, Rosario, I think they showed bean hectares were down 400,000 and corn in the nucleozone, and corn on the other hand was up 25%. And that was just that October, November rain just came and opened that window. And I think we've seen something very similar in Brazil where you were getting very close to where you needed to start slashing these yields rapidly.
yeah.
And now you know, the question is, how big is it? And, you know, you've got Rio Grande do Sul, you got some Paradigm to the northern half, but otherwise, you're gonna be 200% above a year ago. And I mean, last year, people overcut by 10 million tons.
Mhm.
You know, so I think, yeah, we're out of the woods, and to the point about competing, is South America is just gonna be in a much better position come, you know, Q4 this year. But we went to 122 and we're back up to 126.5, 127, so.
Okay, that would make sense. And then that would fit in line. I was trying to find to see if I had my Excel spreadsheet pulled up to look at, you know, because the USDA is expecting, or at least in the outlook forum numbers, you know, they are expecting reduction in new crop corn exports. So that is kind of baked in, this increase in available supply. So it's not necessarily bearish. I'm not going to say at this point face value wise, but we've lost the bullish tailwind from South America corn supply at this point, you could say.
Yep.
All right. Anything, what I'm trying to be aware of our time here. I told Eduardo we'd be done within 40 minutes for sure, and I'm sure the audience would appreciate that as well. Karl, any questions that you have or anything that you guys think we should touch on before we call it a week?
Eduardo, China has announced they're gonna start shopping elsewhere for some of the red meats. They're going to Australia for beef. And they're talking of picking up more pork out of Brazil. Have you guys, you know, number one, have you picked up any of that? And number two, do you think it could lead to expansion in that Brazilian hog herd? You know, if China does follow through on this demand?
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, since 20s, because of the ASF, Brazil increased the herd in Brazil, the hog herd. So they are keeping because it's profitable now. It was a very 2021-22 were a very bad years in terms of profitability, but now corn is cheaper and soybean meal is cheaper as well. And then China keep buying more and more. And we have some companies, Chinese companies, that are investing here in Brazil, buying locals, companies. So it's increasing. Yes, the first question, yes. And also cattle market, it's increasing the same way. China is buying more and more. The problem is the locals in China, the cattle producers in China, they are losing a lot of money in the last 1 year or two. Then they are complain about the very cheap beef from Brazil or Uruguay and Argentina. But I don't know if Chinese government want to cut or block the importation from Brazil because it's very cheap. And our meat, in terms of cattle, beef, it's a third in terms of prices. You have the US, the Australian, and then the middle, Uruguay and Argentina. And Brazil is a cane meat, you know, so it's not expensive. So it helps China to increase the local supply in terms of meat, beef, and Brazil. I think it's going to increase more and more. They export to China in terms of hog and beef. Then the result is our feed market is increasing this year. I think at least 5%, and we can see because of the soybean meal supply to the internal market and corn. So in the end, it's a good story for Brazil.
Okay. Thank you.
And similar, you know, our China just reopened to Argentine poultry. Domestically, the meat prices are high, but internationally, they're going to stay extremely low, and especially from an investment perspective. So there's, you know, limits right now on how much decent cuts they can sell to the US. But I think Argentina too, you're going to see a lot of investment into those areas just because of you just have so much essentially trapped cheap feed, and you know, your cost of build is a fraction of what it is in these more developed markets.
I guess
We just
something
wanna
that's, go ahead.
we just want to ride Brazil's coattails.
Whatever they did, you guys are gonna do at this
Exactly.
point. But maybe a little cooler, because Mile with his chainsaw, just he can't help himself. That's all there is.
Yeah, all of us, we need more demand because
Yeah.
we have a lot of grains. So
Yeah.
it's good for everyone.
Well, I was
in the
gonna
end.
say that's the positive sign to me out of all of this. I mean, it's not long, we're not long removed from a lot of conversations among at least US analysts that were discussing plateau demand and a lack of demand growth. In honestly, if you were to sit and have a lot of conversations with folks on, on the brokerage side or analytical side, I mean, they're still pumping that narrative out, that, demand growth is lacking, and that's a fallacy. Like, I mean, global growth is happening. Obviously, global supply is growing as well, and that's what's helping to cure or push this drive of an increase in demand as a whole. Like, you need the supply in order to do it. Like I said, I am relieved to see a good safrinha crop, because I want to see Brazil continue to push towards corn ethanol in a big way. And so to see a good supply, to see good margins, to see increased demand is a good sign, overall. And I like to see the same thing here in the US. That was going to be one of the things I said, is we actually do have demand growth. Yes, we have supply growth, but we have demand growth, and those are good things. As we call it a week, which always amazes me how quickly 35 minutes, 40, like I could ask you a million questions and still have a million more. But with you guys, looking at South America as we wrap up the growing season pretty soon here, it's going to be your guys' turn, or your turn, Eduardo, at least, to ask. Nick has a lot of folks up here that he can ask. He doesn't have to ask me, but where it's like, what's going on in the US from a production standpoint. But as we get to the end of the week here, is there anything that you think we should be talking about or looking at, in cash grain in general, that we might be missing, or something that you think has happened that is important, might be trade related or whatever, just kind of something that you're watching here to wrap up the week? Any thoughts on that? No, but whoever wants to go first, go first.
By all means, Edward.
Okay, you go. You go first.
No, I mean, for us, I think it's a pretty successful versus where they were in January. It's a very successful end of the year, and these movements are all positive. I think the biggest thing is the current track of this trade war. Is it sustainable? 30 to 60 days from now. So if something doesn't give, do they devalue? And I think that would be just, I've kind of made some comments, but I think farmer selling in South America, especially this time of year, would be very ripe if you had a massive devaluation, because like it would absolutely pressure the real. I don't know how well Mile could hold, the peso through that. So if you did get a large devaluation, the knockdown effects in EM would be pretty big, but I think the farmer selling in South America could be, see a bit of a windfall there.
Definitely something to watch. Eduardo,
Two things. One about China. The soybean meal, it's crazy market. It's on fire.
Yeah.
The spot market. Then I think this is going to be a new normal. Time to time, then we are going to see this kind of pipeline to China, and problems because the concentration in Brazil is too big, and it's going to increase. And the other thing is a very good discussions we see on X about if China will buy zero or something.
Yeah.
Something new from soybean from the US. Yeah, it's a good discussion, and very fun to discuss if these tariffs will impact or not the demand, and then the size of the West crop. So in the end, it's a flip coin, and then we have to see, because in my opinion, China has to buy something, 15 million at least in the US. Doesn't matter if we have 1% of tariff or 1,000. It's a kind of food security, and then the programs that China, the state companies they have, and it's a very different market comparing to 1819. So,
Mhm.
which is we create a very big moves in terms of the futures in Chicago.
There's a very good chance along that theme that, this could be the beginning of a very, very, I don't want to use the same term as golden era because that's what the White House has been using. But this could be the golden age of Latin America from a standpoint of agriculture and even things like biofuels, the growth in Argentina, Argentina is so protectionist. That's been one of the big hindrances is the idea that biofuels could come compete too.
Mhm.
If you open these up, especially in the Western Hemisphere where you should have more free trade or reason, you're not going to have that incentive the way you will with the East and the West. This could be a very, very golden period for Latin America on, biofuels that certainly demand on all fronts, meat growth, proteins. So I think, if you're sitting in South America and, looking north to the US or east to China, you should be pretty optimistic.
It'll be it's gonna be an interesting year. Lots of moving pieces, lots of important things to be paying attention to. I do want to plan on next week. We'll discuss a bit more, so I'll give you guys some homework ahead of time. Your point, Eduardo, on China's going to have to buy some beans from the US. Like, let's plan on next week discussing a little bit of market share, if that works for you. I love a good market share conversation. And some of the other factors. It's one of the things I always kind of point out is like just because it says it on a spreadsheet doesn't mean it's available today or whatever, especially as we see increases in on-farm storage and an understanding of how to merchandise as a farmer around the world. I think there's some interesting shifts and dynamics that have happened. And so yeah, we'll figure next week discussing market share and what that looks like if we do see a continuation of tariffs. So hopefully having me say that will mean that by this afternoon we have a drop in tariffs and it's not even an issue, which is also very unlikely, but whatever, we'll see. So no, I appreciate everyone's time. And if you guys have any questions, I get a handful of them in my DMs and I appreciate it. So please, if you have questions that you want us to ask and things that you want to be discussing here, reach out, let me know. But in the meantime, if you need anything at all, just give us a holler. Otherwise, we'll be back next week. So thank you, everyone.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Cheers.